As the congregation gathered for the morning mass, the sacred stillness of the church was broken by an unsettling sound. A dog barking relentlessly at the altar. Whispers rippled through the pews as the animal refused to be calmed, its eyes fixed on something no one else could see. What they discovered inside would leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about their faith. Stay tuned as we unravel this chilling tale. The day began like any other Sunday at St. Michael's Church. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows, casting vibrant colors across the wooden pews. The congregation, dressed in their Sunday best, filed in quietly, exchanging polite greetings and preparing their hearts for worship. The choir softly rehearsed a hymn, their voices blending harmoniously with the serene atmosphere. Father Benedict, a man known for his calming presence and thoughtful sermons, stood at the altar, flipping through his notes for the homily. Everything seemed perfectly in order until an unexpected sound shattered the tranquility. A bark, sharp, persistent, and startling, echoed through the sanctuary. Heads turned, brows furrowed, and the once reverent silence gave way to murmurs of confusion. A stray dog, its fur a patchwork of gray and white, had wandered in from the open doors at the back of the church. At first, people dismissed it as a minor disruption. Perhaps the dog was simply lost or hungry, some thought. But this was no ordinary dog, and its actions were far from random. The animal, instead of wandering aimlessly or seeking food, trotted straight down the center aisle with purpose. It stopped a few feet from the altar, its tail rigid, ears perked, and began barking, loud, insistent, and unrelenting. The congregation watched in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. The dog's eyes, wide and almost glowing with intensity, seemed to fixate on something that no one else could see. Father Benedict tried to continue the Mass, his voice straining to rise above the dog's incessant barking. A few parishioners stood and approached the animal, hoping to coax it away or lead it outside, but it refused to budge. Every time someone got close, the dog would back away momentarily, only to return to the same spot in front of the altar, barking with even greater urgency. Its behavior was so focused, so deliberate, that it began to unnerve those watching. "Perhaps it senses something," whispered an elderly woman, clutching her rosary tightly. Others nodded in agreement, their unease growing with each passing moment. The barking continued, a relentless rhythm that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the church. Father Benedict finally paused, stepping back from the altar, his expression one of deep concern. "What do you see, boy?" he muttered under his breath, as though addressing the dog directly. The animal, as if understanding the question, let out a series of sharp barks and scratched at the floor near the altar's base. The sound of claws against stone sent chills down the spines of those nearby. Despite the disruption, the Mass carried on, albeit with a lingering sense of dread. The dog remained by the altar, occasionally barking but now mostly staring at the same spot, its gaze unwavering. By the time the service ended, many parishioners chose to linger, their curiosity piqued by the dog's strange behavior. Father Benedict, too, felt compelled to investigate. After all, the altar was the holiest place in the church, a space consecrated to God. If something was amiss, it was his duty to uncover it. Once the congregation had thinned out, Father Benedict, joined by a few trusted parishioners, approached the altar. The dog, seeing their movement, stepped aside but stayed close, watching intently. The priest knelt down and ran his hands across the stone floor where the dog had been scratching. At first, he found nothing unusual. The stones were solid and unyielding, just as they had always been. But as he pressed on one particular section, he noticed a slight give. "Help me move this," he said, gesturing to the nearest parishioner. Together they pried the stone loose, revealing a small, dark cavity beneath the altar. The group leaned in closer, their breaths held in anticipation. The dog began to bark again, but this time it sounded more like an urgent warning than a cry for attention. "What is this?" someone whispered as Father Benedict reached into the opening. His fingers brushed against something hard and cold. With a slow, deliberate motion, he pulled out an ancient wooden box, its surface covered in strange, intricate carvings. Dust and cobwebs clung to its edges, evidence that it had been hidden for a very long time. The dog immediately stopped barking and sat down, its head tilted slightly as if satisfied. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the barking had been. Father Benedict held the box in his hands, studying the symbols etched into the wood. They were unlike anything he had ever seen before. Swirling patterns and jagged lines that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. "Do you think it's valuable?" one of the parishioners asked, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "It's not the kind of value we measure in money," Father Benedict replied, his tone grave. He set the box on the altar and carefully unlatched it. Inside were several objects, each one more mysterious than the last. Brittle parchment covered in an unfamiliar script, a tarnished silver crucifix, and a small glass vial filled with what appeared to be dried blood. As he examined the contents, an unsettling realization dawned on him. These were no ordinary artifacts. They carried a weight, a palpable energy that made the air in the church feel heavier. The dog, still sitting near the altar, let out a low whine, as if sensing the gravity of the discovery. "This isn't just a relic," Father Benedict murmured. "This is a warning." The ancient wooden box sat on the altar, its contents laid bare before Father Benedict and the small group of parishioners who remained. A heavy silence filled the air, broken only by the occasional rustling of fabric as people shifted nervously in their seats. The dog, now seated calmly beside the altar, kept its watchful eyes on the priest, as though ensuring that he handled the discovery with the gravity it deserved. Father Benedict picked up the brittle parchment first, his fingers trembling slightly as he tried not to damage the fragile material. The script was unlike anything he had ever seen. Looping, fluid characters, interspersed with sharp angles and marks that seemed to shimmer faintly in the light. He knew enough Latin to recognize that this was not it, nor did it resemble Greek or Hebrew, the other ancient languages he was somewhat familiar with. "I'll need help to translate this," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "This is beyond me." One of the parishioners, a young woman named Claire who had studied linguistics in university, stepped forward. "Father, I can try to make sense of it. I've studied some old texts, and I know people at the university who might help." He nodded and handed her the parchment, watching as she carefully rolled it up and placed it into a protective case. His attention then shifted to the crucifix. Though tarnished and aged, it was unmistakably beautiful, with delicate engravings that depicted scenes of angels and demons locked in battle. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, but what struck Father Benedict most was the energy radiating from it. It wasn't physical heat or cold, but something more profound, an intangible presence that seemed to hum with an ancient power. "This crucifix," he murmured, holding it up for the others to see, "feels alive, as though it has witnessed things we cannot begin to imagine." "Do you think it's a holy relic?" asked James, one of the church's longtime members. His voice was tinged with both awe and fear. "Perhaps," Father Benedict replied, though he couldn't shake the unease he felt. "But relics are usually displayed, venerated. This one was hidden, deliberately, I think." Finally, his gaze fell on the small glass vial. He hesitated before picking it up, the weight of its significance pressing on him. The dark, dried substance within was unmistakably blood, though its origins were a mystery. The vial itself was unadorned, a simple cylinder sealed with wax. Yet the blood inside seemed almost to pulse, as if it retained some vestige of life. The room seemed to grow colder as Father Benedict lifted the vial. A chill ran down his spine, and he could feel the eyes of the parishioners on him, their anxiety mirrored in his own heart. Whose blood is this? He wondered aloud. And why would it be kept here, beneath the altar, hidden from sight? The dog let out a low growl, snapping everyone's attention back to the present. It was staring at the box, its ears flattened against its head. Father Benedict carefully returned the vial to its place, closed the box, and re-latched it. The moment he did, the oppressive feeling in the room lifted slightly, though the tension remained. "We need answers," Father Benedict said, his voice firm. "This is no ordinary find. Whatever this box is, whatever these objects represent, they were hidden here for a reason. We need to understand that reason before we do anything further." The parishioners murmured their agreement, though the fear in their eyes was clear. No one could shake the feeling that they had unearthed something that was meant to stay buried. Later that evening, Father Benedict made arrangements to visit a local historian, Dr. Alistair Hayes, who specialized in religious artifacts. He had helped the church identify relics in the past and was well regarded for his knowledge of ancient texts and symbols. Claire agreed to accompany him with the parchment, while the crucifix and vial remained locked in the church's safe, under the watchful eye of the ever-present dog. When they arrived at Dr. Hayes's study, the historian greeted them warmly but quickly became serious when he saw the artifacts. He examined the parchment first, his expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. "This script is ancient," he said, running his fingers lightly over the symbols. "It predates Latin, perhaps even predates the early church. It's a blend of early Christian symbolism and something older. Pagan, perhaps. I'll need more time to translate it, but I can tell you this much. These aren't just writings. They're warnings." "Warnings of what?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Hayes shook his head. "I can't say for certain yet, but the presence of the crucifix suggests a conflict, spiritual, perhaps even physical. The combination of Christian and pre-Christian elements implies that whatever this is, it's tied to a time when the church was still fighting to establish itself against older beliefs and practices." Father Benedict's unease deepened. "And the blood?" Dr. Hayes hesitated before answering. "If it's genuine, and I suspect it is, then it could belong to a martyr, someone who died for their faith. The fact that it's preserved suggests it was believed to hold great power. In ancient times, the blood of martyrs was considered sacred, capable of warding off evil or sanctifying spaces." "But why hide it?" Claire pressed. "If it's sacred, why not display it?" Dr. Hayes leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. "That's the question, isn't it? Sacred relics are usually celebrated, shared with the faithful. If this was hidden, it means someone believed it was dangerous, or perhaps that it was protecting something even more dangerous." Father Benedict exchanged a glance with Claire, his resolve hardening. Whatever they had uncovered, it was clear they had only begun to scratch the surface. The true significance of the box and the dog that had led them to it remained shrouded in mystery. But one thing was certain: their lives and the life of St. Michael's Church would never be the same. The days that followed the discovery of the box were anything but ordinary. Though Father Benedict tried to maintain the regular schedule of masses and church activities, an undeniable tension hung over St. Michael's. It was as if the air itself had thickened, pressing down on everyone who entered the sanctuary. The dog, now a near constant presence, stationed itself near the altar, rarely leaving its post. Parishioners who had initially been amused by its arrival now treated it with a mix of reverence and unease. Rumors began to spread. Some claimed the dog was a divine messenger, sent by God to protect the church. Others whispered that it was a harbinger of something darker. The sense of the unknown stirred the imaginations of the faithful, and attendance at Mass swelled as people sought answers, or simply wanted to witness the strange events for themselves. But it wasn't just the dog or the relics that unsettled the community. Strange occurrences began to plague the church. It started subtly. Candles that refused to stay lit. Faint whispers heard during prayer that seemed to emanate from nowhere. Parishioners reported feeling sudden chills, even on warm days, and some claimed to see fleeting shadows near the altar. Father Benedict initially dismissed these accounts as nerves or overactive imaginations, but as the incidents grew more frequent and more disturbing, it became harder to ignore. One night, while preparing for the next day's service, Father Benedict was alone in the sanctuary. He knelt before the altar, deep in prayer, when a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. The air grew cold, and he felt an unmistakable presence behind him. Slowly, he turned, but there was no one there, only the vast, empty pews stretching out before him. He reached for the crucifix found in the box, clutching it tightly as he recited the Lord's Prayer. The dog, which had been lying quietly nearby, suddenly stood and began growling, its gaze fixed on a dark corner of the room. Its growls escalated into barking, echoing loudly in the silent church. Father Benedict's heart raced as he followed the dog's line of sight, but he saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, and he couldn't shake the sense that something unseen was stalking the sacred space. The following morning, he shared his experience with Claire and Dr. Hayes, who had continued their work on the ancient parchment. Dr. Hayes revealed that he had made progress in translating the text, though his findings only deepened the mystery. The writing speaks of a powerful artifact, Dr. Hayes explained, spreading out his notes on the table. A vessel that was created to seal away a great evil. The symbols suggest that this artifact, this box, was hidden in holy ground to prevent it from being disturbed. "What kind of evil are we talking about?" Claire asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. Dr. Hayes hesitated. The text is vague, but it mentions a shadow that feeds on the faithful. It's possible this refers to a literal entity, something the early church sought to banish or contain. The blood in the vial may have been part of the sealing ritual, a sacrifice made to protect the living. Father Benedict felt a chill run down his spine. And now that the box has been opened, Dr. Hayes sighed. If the seal was indeed broken, it's possible that whatever was contained could be trying to reassert itself. The strange occurrences you've described, the cold, the whispers, the shadows, they could be signs of its presence. Despite their fear, Father Benedict and his companions agreed that the church needed to confront the growing disturbances head-on. That evening, he called for a special vigil. The parishioners gathered in the sanctuary, their faces solemn as they lit candles and knelt in prayer. The dog sat near the altar, its head held high, as if standing guard. Father Benedict led the congregation in reciting the rosary, his voice strong and unwavering. But as the prayers continued, the atmosphere in the church began to change. The temperature dropped sharply, and the flickering candlelight cast eerie, distorted shadows on the walls. The whispers returned, louder this time, an unintelligible murmur that seemed to come from all directions at once. Some parishioners looked around nervously, clutching their rosaries tighter. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the sanctuary, causing people to gasp and turn toward the altar. The ornate cross that hung above it had fallen to the ground, its impact reverberating like a thunderclap. The whispers grew into a cacophony, a chorus of disembodied voices that sent chills through the room. The dog stood and barked furiously, its eyes fixed on the altar. "Stay strong," Father Benedict called out, raising the crucifix from the ancient box. "The Lord is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Do not fear." He began sprinkling holy water around the sanctuary, his prayers growing louder as he moved. The dog followed him, its barking relentless, as if trying to drive away whatever unseen force had taken hold. The parishioners joined in, their voices trembling but resolute as they recited Psalm 91. As the vigil wore on, the disturbances seemed to intensify. Shadows moved unnaturally across the walls, and the air grew heavy with an almost tangible malice. Father Benedict could feel the weight of something pressing against his spirit, a darkness that sought to extinguish the light of faith. Yet he stood firm, holding the crucifix aloft and calling upon the name of Christ. After what felt like hours, the oppressive presence began to wane. The whispers faded into silence, and the air grew lighter. The shadows dissolved, leaving only the soft glow of the candles. Exhausted but victorious, the congregation let out a collective sigh of relief. The dog, its mission seemingly complete for the night, lay down by the altar, its eyes half closed. But Father Benedict knew the battle was far from over. Whatever they were facing was powerful, ancient, and deeply rooted in the church's past. The relics had been disturbed, the seal broken, and the darkness awakened. If they were to protect St. Michael's and their faith, they would need to rely on every ounce of courage and devotion they possessed. The days following the vigil were a mix of relief and dread. Though the oppressive presence seemed to have subsided for the moment, Father Benedict and the parishioners could not shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of a larger, more dangerous confrontation. The ancient box and its contents had become the focus of their concerns, a physical reminder of the unseen forces they were facing. The dog, now affectionately referred to as the guardian by the congregation, continued its watchful vigil by the altar, an unwavering sentinel against the darkness. Father Benedict knew that their victory during the vigil had been temporary. The malevolent force they had encountered was not gone. It had merely retreated, perhaps gathering strength for another attack. He spent hours in prayer and study, seeking guidance on how to proceed. The crucifix from the box, with its strange energy and intricate engravings, rarely left his side. He felt its presence gave him strength, though he also sensed the weight of its significance, a burden he could not yet fully understand. Meanwhile, Dr. Hayes and Claire continued their work on the parchment. The historian had made further progress in decoding the ancient text, uncovering a grim and urgent warning. According to the translation, the box was more than a container. It was a seal, a safeguard created by early Christian mystics to imprison a powerful entity. The text referred to this entity as Umbra Aeternum, or the Eternal Shadow, a being that thrived on despair, fear, and the erosion of faith. The mystics had sacrificed greatly to bind the shadow, using the blood of a martyr to sanctify the seal and protect the church. Dr. Hayes' findings confirmed Father Benedict's worst fears. By opening the box, even inadvertently, they had weakened the seal and allowed the shadow to begin influencing the physical world once more. The historian's notes also included a chilling revelation. The shadow would not simply stop at haunting the church. If left unchecked, it would spread, corrupting not only St. Michael's, but the surrounding community and beyond. With this knowledge in hand, Father Benedict called a meeting with the parishioners. The sanctuary was packed, every seat filled as people leaned forward to hear what their priest would say. The dog lay at his feet, its presence a quiet reassurance amid the tension. "We are facing a spiritual battle," Father Benedict began, his voice steady but filled with gravity. "This church has been a place of worship, of refuge, for generations. But now we know that it also holds a dark secret, one that was hidden to protect us. That protection has been compromised, and it is our duty to restore it." He explained what they had learned about the box and the shadow, sparing no details. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as he described the entity and its potential for destruction. But he also spoke of hope, the power of faith in the strength of their community. "We are not alone in this fight," he said, holding up the crucifix. "The same God who protected those early Christians protects us now. Together, through prayer, fasting, and unwavering belief, we can banish this darkness and restore the light." The parishioners responded with a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next several days, the church became a hub of spiritual activity. People gathered for round-the-clock prayer vigils, reciting psalms and hymns that echoed through the sanctuary. Father Benedict led daily Mass, each one culminating in a blessing of the church and its congregation. The dog was a constant presence, its calm demeanor providing comfort to all who came. But as the nights wore on, the disturbances returned with greater ferocity. The whispers became more insistent, turning into guttural growls that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Objects were moved or thrown across the room by unseen hands, and shadowy figures appeared with increasing frequency. Parishioners reported vivid nightmares and feelings of suffocation during sleep, as if the shadow was attacking them even in their homes. Father Benedict realized they needed to take stronger action. He consulted with the bishop, who approved an exorcism to cleanse the church and re-establish the sacred seal. The ritual would be dangerous, requiring intense focus and unwavering faith. The bishop sent 2 additional priests, Fathers Matthew and Joseph, to assist with the ceremony, along with relics from the diocesan archives. Blessed oils, a reliquary containing a saint's bone, and a large golden crucifix. The exorcism was scheduled for midnight, the hour when the disturbances were at their peak. The church was cleared of all but the priests and a select group of parishioners who volunteered to assist by praying throughout the ritual. Candles lined the walls, their flickering flames casting long, eerie shadows. The ancient box was placed on the altar, its lid once again closed and sealed with blessed wax. The dog sat nearby, its body tense, as if bracing for what was to come. The ritual began with a solemn invocation of the Holy Spirit. Father Benedict and the other priests moved through the sanctuary, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers of deliverance. Almost immediately, the temperature dropped and the whispers returned, louder than ever. The shadows along the walls seemed to writhe and twist, taking on grotesque shapes that taunted and threatened the priests. As Father Benedict approached the altar, holding the ancient crucifix aloft, a deafening roar filled the sanctuary. The box began to vibrate, its lid rattling as if something inside was trying to escape. The dog barked furiously, its voice rising above the chaos, and positioned itself between the altar and the congregation, as though shielding them from harm. The priests continued their prayers, their voices growing louder as the shadows converged around the altar. Father Matthew anointed the box with holy oil, while Father Joseph held the golden crucifix high, its polished surface reflecting the candlelight like a beacon. Father Benedict placed his hands on the box and began the final exorcism prayer, calling upon Christ to bind the shadow and restore the seal. The roar grew louder, shaking the very walls of the church, but the priests did not falter. With a final cry of, "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti," Father Benedict slammed the crucifix onto the box, and a blinding light erupted from within. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into nothingness as the light spread, filling every corner of the sanctuary. When the light faded, the box was still, and the oppressive presence was gone. The church fell silent, save for the soft sound of the dog's breathing. It looked up at Father Benedict, wagging its tail once before lying down, its mission complete. The parishioners returned the next day to find the church restored to peace. The box was sent to the Vatican for safekeeping, its secrets locked away once more. Though life at St. Michael's returned to normal, the story of the shadow and the dog that saved them would be told for generations, a reminder of the unseen battles fought in the name of faith and the enduring power of light over darkness.